but they did. Yeah. Did you get it? They make a kosher Pesach gin? Wow. Is it really? Who would have thought? Gin and vodka. It's not the Kedem stuff. It's. We used to drink something called Slivovitz. Slivovitz is a Hungarian plum brandy. It's Romanian. Well, if you drink it, you feel like you're Romanian. That's the difference. And what happens, Slivovitz is like fire water. Remember those old Western movies where you weren't allowed to sell fire water to the natives? That's what Slivovitz is. It's horrible stuff. Just horrible. You drink it and you forget who you are and where you are, and you're dancing on the table, and it's embarrassing because it's in shul. So it's all right. So if you'd like to join the contest, if you're out shopping and you find an interesting product, then let me know. Either take a picture with your phone and send it to me, or just tell me what you found, and we'll consider you for the contest, and you too can earn immortality here at Valley Beth Shalom. Triangle matzah. Someone showed me gluten-free matzah. It's made with no wheat. It's made with tapioca paste or something. Gay vase. Was it really? I tasted some the other day. It was very good, actually. It was, and apparently, it's not nearly as bad for you as matzah is. Okay, so let's start from the very beginning, and we'll get to the question of what you eat and what you don't eat. Okay. What you have in Passover is a recitation of the master story. Translation. A human community is held together by a story. The American story, of course, is the story of Thanksgiving, right? Our ancestors left England because of tyranny. They came to America seeking freedom. They found help from the natives in this continent. They built a place of freedom in this continent, and we gather every November to eat turkey and stuffing and mashed potatoes and all that good stuff, pie and cornbread, because we recite the story. It's a ritual for the recitation of the story that makes us the community that we are. The master story of the Jewish people is Yetziat Mitzrayim, the Exodus from Egypt. If you want to understand who we are, if you want to understand our ethics, if you want to understand our politics, if you want to understand our theology, our belief in God, you have to begin with this experience with the Exodus from Egypt. The idea that, on the one hand, we remember slavery. We were slaves in the land of Egypt. And you have to understand that in the ancient world, and even in the modern world to an extent, to claim a slave as an ancestor was not dignified. That was not an advantage. Everybody wanted to be related to nobility. Just like in America, everybody wants to be related to wealth. But to say that my ancestors were slaves is a very powerful statement, because it sets us as looking at society in a certain way. Over and over again in the Torah, you're told to do such and such because you were a slave in the land of Egypt. And most of those statements have to do with the poor and the dispossessed. You're to take care of the stranger and the widow and the orphan because you were slaves in the land of Egypt. And therefore, the Torah is really built on an ethic of empathy. I look at the slave, I look at the stranger, the widow, the orphan, the homeless person, the dispossessed person, the poor person, and I feel something because I was him. And I was him recently. And I feel what he feels, and I know what he knows, and I know his oppression and his humiliation and his sense of being shoved to the side of a society, because that was me. This is the beginning of a Jewish social ethic. It's the beginning of a Jewish sensitivity to the poor. I mean, one of the great questions that's always asked in Jewish sociology is why it is that we are the wealthiest ethnic group in America, but we vote like the poorest. And that's true. In New York, they used to say Jews earn like Episcopalians, but they vote like Puerto Ricans, which means we earn like the most privileged sectors of society, but we vote like the most marginalized. And the answer is because that's the memory we carry with us. And that memory engenders a sense of empathy, not a sense of rejection, and a sense of responsibility. And this story is at the heart of that identity. The second part of the story is, then we were liberated. God took us from there with an outstretched arm and a mighty hand and brought us across the Red Sea and brought us across the wilderness and planted us in our land. So the second half of the story is that we know liberation. We know that history can change. We know that the social conditions, the political conditions, the distribution of power at any particular moment in history is not fixed. Poor people can find their way to wealth. Oppressed people can find their way to liberation. Dispossessed people can find their way to security. History can change. And we believe in a God who has certain interests in human history, a God who sponsors freedom. Now, again, in the ancient world, this was an unheard of idea. In the philosophy of Plato and Aristotle, you were born into a social class, and that's where you belong. If you were born a serf or a slave, that's where God wanted you. If you were born wealthy, that's where God wanted you. If you were born nobility, that's where you deserve to be. And this idea that a slave can be liberated and become a free person, that a dispossessed person can find their way to some sort of material and spiritual security, this idea that the social conditions we live in are plastic, they can change. This crazy idea in the world of the ancients. But this was the idea of the Bible. This was the Bible's great revolution. Because I saw the Red Sea split, I have hope. I believe that the world can change, that the world can be repaired, that the world can be elevated, that human beings don't have to be stuck in oppressive, persecuted positions their entire existence. That's not necessary. It doesn't have to be that way. It's not inevitable. So this is the great revolution, the great spiritual revolution of the Passover story. And this is why the Passover story is really at the very heart of everything we are that's Jewish. Now, how do you take that story and share it? That's the great question. Because it's one thing to share it if you're there. So I had an uncle who was a survivor of the Holocaust, and he would go around telling his story, and we knew the Holocaust happened because Uncle Henry saw it. Some of you have relatives who were survivors, and they told you their stories, or they didn't tell you their stories, but you knew their stories. What happens after that generation is gone? After the generation that saw it is gone? What happens when our conditions of life change so significantly that it's hard to even imagine what it was like to be slaves? And so the tradition comes up with an ingenious mechanism, an ingenious technology. And this technology is, I'm going to give you an experience as if. As if. So we're going to play a great game of pretend. Passover is a great drama. Okay? Erev Pesach, we're going to have a Seder. That's Friday night, and if you're crazy, Saturday night, right? And what are you going to do with the Seder? You're going to invite all the relatives you can't stand to the table, right? You're going to put out this humongous meal, but before you dig into this repast, we're going to tell a story, and we're going to do it in such a way as if we are pretending that tonight's the last night in slavery. Tonight's our last night. We were slaves, our parents were slaves, their parents were slaves, their parents were slaves, our kids were destined to be slaves, and all of a sudden comes this fellow Moses and says, pack your things, we're leaving tomorrow. That's the feeling at the Seder table. That moment of the night before we left, that's what the Seder is trying to recreate. So what we're going to do is do some drama. And the table becomes a stage, and the Haggadah is the script, and we become the players, and the food becomes the props. Because we're going to say to the kid, listen, kid, I got something to tell you which I never told you before. We're not who you think we are. Remember these old movies where they would take the kid down to the basement and tell him we're really Russian spies or something, right? Or we came from another planet, you know? Superman, that's the greatest. I talked about this one on Shabbos. Superman, right? The kid comes to his father, to Kent, and says to Clark Kent, comes to his father, how come I'm weird? I mean, listen, how come I'm weird? I can run faster, jump higher, do all these things. Who am I? It's classic teenage angst, right? And Dad takes him down to the basement, uncovers the spaceship, and said, son, you're not really my son. right? One night, Mom and I were chugging along in our car, and this thing came hurtling out of the sky, and we rescued you, and that's who you are. You're a strange visitor from another planet, right? You remember that scene in Superman, right? It gets played over and over again every time they remake the movie. Well, in a certain way, that's the Pesach, right? Kid, you're not really an upper middle class American from Encino. You're a slave in Egypt. Let me tell you who we really are. And that's what you're disclosing the identity. And you're going to do it in a dramatic way. Let me tell you the story of how we got here. We were slaves. What's slavery like? It's intensely bitter. Here, taste this. Ugh, that's horrible. Right. Then what happened? God sent Moshe. Moshe liberates us. Right? 10 plagues fall down. You tell the whole story, and you use the food as a play. It's a big play. It's a big dramatic presentation. When my kids were small, we had sock puppets. That makes for a great story, right? Let my people go. No, no, no. Now they're bigger. With 4 cups of wine, you can still use sock puppets. People can get into it, you know? But the drama of it is remarkable. And then at the end, you say, we cross the Red Sea, and we sing Dayenu, because that's the miracle of all miracles. We crossed the Red Sea, and we turned around, and we realized Pharaoh wasn't chasing us anymore. And then we turned back out, and we looked out at the expanse of the wilderness and realized that this was all ours. We were free. We were now free people. My uncle, I once asked my uncle spent 6 years in Nazi concentration camps. And I once asked him, what was the last night in concentration camp like? Right? And Uncle Henry he was very generous with us. He told us, he said, I'll tell you what happened. He was in Auschwitz because he was one of the carpenters who built Auschwitz. And there were 3,500 men left in Auschwitz as the Russians were just on the border of Auschwitz, of the town. So the Nazis evacuated the 3,500 men, and they had to walk through the Polish winter, the death march. 700 guys arrived, and he was put in one of the out camps of Bergen-Belsen in Germany. And they brought him to this camp, and the Allies were coming from the west, and the Russians were coming from the east. And they could hear the bombing, and they could hear the shooting, and they could hear the artillery, and they knew something was going to happen. And finally, the commandant comes, and they put all of the men in one barracks. They put 100 men into one tiny barracks and nailed the door shut. And they said, my uncle said, we thought we were going to die that night. We thought they would set it on fire. We thought they would machine gun us all. They didn't want anybody there who could tell the story of what happened. So all night long, we stayed up waiting for the moment when the Nazis would kill us all. And then sun comes up in the morning, and we could see the sun through the cracks of the door. And we heard machinery moving all night long, and explosions and gunfire all night long. He said, then we heard these heavy steps coming up the ramp. There was a ramp that led to the door of the barracks. And we thought, this is it. And a giant boot smashed down the front door of the barracks. And all the men in his barracks threw themselves on the ground and began to recite Shema Yisrael. They thought they were all going to die. When the next thing they heard was Yiddish, spoken with an Oklahoma accent. And standing at the door was a 6'5" American sergeant who was a Jewish kid from Oklahoma, who'd been sent on the reconnaissance force into the camp to see if there were any survivors. And in Oklahoma Yiddish, he asked, who are you guys? And the men looked up. They'd never seen a person that big in their lives. And this giant American soldier speaking bad American Yiddish, right? And they said, they brought in the Red Cross, and they survived. That's what the Seder is, the poignance of the last night in Egypt. That's what the Seder is supposed to recreate. That's the drama of the Seder, right? That's the drama of the Seder. Now, the other way that the holiday enforces the drama is after the two Seders, for the rest of the week, we are forbidden to eat leaven, forbidden to eat certain kinds of foods. Now, the first thing you understand, because you're all Jews, is that if you change a Jewish person's dietary practices, you change their life, right? I mean, you change a person's eating pattern. I don't know how many of you have ever been on Weight Watchers, but Weight Watchers, was created by Jews, right? Because nobody is obsessed with food like we are, and only someone who is obsessed with food 3 ounces of this, 18 points of that. You know, those wonderful commercials. It's so easy. Nonsense. It's written by Lithuanian rabbis. I know this, right? So the point here is that you change our dietary practices for an entire week. And because you change the dietary practices for an entire week, you change the atmosphere of the whole week. So the whole week becomes this very different week. And the basic rule is that leavened grains are not to be eaten this week. Okay? So let's do a little bit of food chemistry, shall we? You all know my dad is a baker. And when I was a kid, he taught me this stuff because he was a chemist when he was young. He took many years of chemistry at UCLA before he became a baker. So here's what it is. There's a certain class of foods called grains. So far, so good? Grains are complex carbohydrates. Complex carbohydrates means they're starches high in sugar. Okay? So far, so good? Good. When you take a grain, complex carbohydrate, and you get it wet, it releases the sugars. Get it? In the air are all sorts of microorganisms, right? Including little microorganisms called yeast. Yeast live all around us all the time. They're spores, actually, and they live in the air, and yeast are hungry for sugar. They love sugar. I don't know how many of you bake, but if you bake, you know how you bake, if you ever bake bread, you take a cup of warm water with sugar in it, and you put in the instant yeast. And what happens in about 3 minutes? Exactly right. So here's what happens. Yeast love sugar. When yeast come into contact with sugar, they eat the sugar and they go nuts. They have a party. And when they have a party, the yeast cells start dividing, right? They start having baby yeasts, mazel tov, right? And when yeasts divide, they give off 2 byproducts, carbon dioxide and alcohol. Okay? Carbon dioxide and alcohol. Carbon dioxide is what you get from, that's why you have, the thing goes in the cup, because the carbon dioxide bubbles start bubbling up, and if you smell it, you can smell the alcohol. Okay? Everybody good so far? Good. That's called leavening. Leavening is wet sugars, wet grains produce sugars. Sugars attract yeast. Yeast divide, they produce carbon dioxide. Okay? Now, the reason why you use instant yeast or a starter when you bake bread is because it would take a long time if you just put the flour out there with some water in it. But eventually, if you just put flour with water in it on your countertop, eventually it will leaven because there is yeast in the air. Okay? That interaction is what is forbidden on Passover. Now, I'll tell you why in a minute, but just understand that. That's the interaction that is forbidden on Passover. Any foods in which the grain has become wet and yeast have started to leaven it, that's called chametz. That's what we don't eat this whole week. Now, I know why would we choose that of all things? I'll tell you in just a moment, but let's go a little bit farther in our story. Okay? Now, the rabbis of our tradition imposed a rule. They have an interesting rule for how they organize the Jewish tradition. And the only way to understand this rule is to visit the New York City subway system. The rule is called siyag. Siyag means extending a prohibition. Here is my story. I lived in New York City from 1978 to 1982. I took the subway pretty much every day. During that time, New York was filled with lots and lots and lots of Japanese tourists who had a lot more money than we did. So they were coming to America to visit America, and they would take the subway because there's a great subway system in Tokyo. So they figured the one in New York has to be equally good. And every day in the New York Post, there would be pictures and stories about Japanese tourists who fell into the subway tracks and got whacked by subways or electrocuted by the subway tracks. Every day there was another story. Mr. Yakahuchi, Mr. Takahuchi, Mr. Hachachi, and his camera, wham, So the geniuses at the Metropolitan Transit Authority in New York decided to put an end to this travesty and this tragedy. And they painted a bright yellow line at the subway at the edge of the subway platform and put up giant signs in English and Japanese saying, for your own safety, don't cross the yellow line. Guess what happened? Nothing. More Japanese tourists kept getting eaten by the subway. Why? Idiot. If you put the line right there at the edge of the platform and someone goes, oh, I'm not going to cross the line, you're going to look down to see if the train's there and you're going to fall in and die, right? It took a great genius about a year before they realized if you really want to stop these things from happening, where should you put the line? Azoy Epis. You're a Talmudic genius. 3 feet back. So they painted even a bigger orange line 3 feet back with bigger letters saying, for your own safety, don't cross the yellow line. Now, if you don't cross that yellow line, you won't fall into the tracks over there. Get it? That's called, in Jewish law, siyag. If I want you to avoid a certain behavior over there, I set up the prohibition over here. Does that make some sense? So, for example, I don't want you eating any leavened grain. So you know what? I'm going to tell you, you can't eat any grain whatsoever. None. Right? The only grain I'm going to let you eat this week is grain which has been carefully supervised so that it never got wet before we baked it into matzah. Matzah is flour, and here's how it works. You have 8 minutes. You have 18 minutes. 18 minutes to take the flour, dump in the water, mush it up, and throw it into an 1800-degree oven. And that kills the yeast in the flour and makes the matzah theoretically unavailable to yeast. That's what makes matzah matzah and not bread. Okay? So the rabbi said, from now on, no grain whatsoever. No grains. So you're going to get rid of all the grains. So I'm busy putting away the pasta, putting away the cereal, and putting away all the bread, everything, even the stuff that's not leavened. I have baking flour, right? I have to put it away. It's chametz. Why? Because it might get leavened. You see how that works? That's the yellow line 3 feet from the platform. Yeah, but if you left it out, if you left cereal out, it would ferment. Yes. Try it. Take a bowl of Cheerios, pour some water on it, leave it on your counter for 3 days. Tell me what happens. I guarantee you, you'll have interesting things growing there soon. Don't eat it. Okay, here's the point. The point of that prohibition is not that the stuff is actually leavened. It could become leavened. It is made out of stuff that could become leavened. So what you're doing is you're pushing the prohibition back. You see how that works? That's called chametz. So those people who are strict about their kosher for Passover are going to eliminate from their diet all kinds of grains. All kinds of grains that not only are leavened, but the grains that could become leavened. And that's what people call kosher for Pesach. Now, here's the next issue, okay? Everybody good so far? Cool? That's why you have this. Now, I know you're asking, but why? I'll get to that, I promise you. Now, here's the next thing. You ready? What about stuff, how about this one? The Bible tells us about grains. So the Talmud lists 7 grains you can't eat. Wheat, barley, spelt, oats, rye, I forget. No, see, that's the point. Corn. What we call corn is not one of the 7 listed in the Talmud. Why not? Why not? Because they didn't have it. Corn is a North American vegetable called maize, and it didn't they didn't know about it. Same thing with rice, by the way. They didn't know about it. So the question is, when you give me the list of the 7 grains, is that only those 7 grains? Or any grain that's like one of those 7 grains? So guess which way the rabbis decided? Yes, exactly right. In the expansive way of it, they pushed the line back 3 more feet. And they said, corn and rice, which are not on the list, but they are grains because they are complex carbohydrates that can become fermented, are now forbidden on Passover. Okay? So corn syrup, which is used almost universally as a sweetener in American products, means that a whole bunch of the things you're used to eating can't be used because it has corn syrup in it. Okay? Rice. Now, rice is an interesting issue. Rice should be forbidden. And in Ashkenazic households, it is forbidden. But in Sephardic households, the great Sephardic rabbis did a really interesting thing. There is another principle of Jewish law which says you can't prohibit something which people need. You can't say air is chumetz, for example. That would be really difficult. I'm sure there's a rabbi somewhere who wants to, but you can't do that. And the Sephardic community eats rice pretty much like they breathe air. So the Sephardic rabbis do a really interesting trick, Erev Pesach, amazing trick. They convert rice to a vegetable, right? You are not rice, you're a vegetable, right? And they make rice into a vegetable. Rice becomes celery. Now, rice has the chemical composition of any other grain, except for 1 week of the year, it becomes celery. How do they do that? They did it. Why did they do that? Because Jewish life is supposed to be a celebration of life and not a burden. Not a terrible, a burden, yes. I mean, in the sense that it changes our pattern of life and it demands a certain amount of effort, yes. But it can't be impossible. And to take rice out of the diet of Sephardic Jews would be to live in impossibility. So the Sephardic rabbis allowed rice, even though it is a grain, which leads you to the following observation, that the difference between Ashkenazim, European Jews, and Sephardim, Spanish or Eastern Jews, is that Ashkenazim eat sashimi and Sephardim eat sushi. I just want to keep that in mind, okay? Now, let's go back to our story, shall we? We have now put the line 6 feet back from the subway platform. But the rabbis weren't finished. Still could make a mistake. What if you thought you were eating something that wasn't a grain, but it turned out to be a grain? It looks like a grain. For example, white beans. White beans and barley look a little bit alike. And you could think that you were eating white beans, which are permissible on Passover, and it turned out you were eating barley. Now, white beans, in fact, all beans, are a class of vegetable called legumes. Legumes are not grains. The difference chemically is that legumes have a high nitrogen concentration, which is why they're very good for you, right? They're very good for you because the nitrogen forms proteins in your body. I don't know how many of you ever read The Diet for the Small Planet, which is a famous diet book where if you match legumes and grains, you end up with a whole protein. That's why you get beans and rice in a Mexican restaurant. Because legumes and grains together form proteins that can satisfy your body's need for protein, even though without animal products. That's how vegetarians live. Okay? Tofu, legume, rice, grain, whole protein. See that? Okay, now, legumes are not grains. They do not ferment in the same way that grains do. However, said the rabbis, they look like grains. And therefore, we're not going to eat them either. We're going to take legumes off the menu. Out. No legumes. And then one of the rabbis said, but wait a minute. Let's be clear about this. The legume looks like a grain, but what if we formed it into a product that didn't look like a grain? For example, soybeans look like barley. Can't eat soybeans. No edamame on Pesach. However, take that out of its natural form and make it into soybean oil, okay, that you can have. Okay? If it's not in its natural form, it can be eaten on Pesach. Okay? So, what? So you're about to get one of my great klutzkashes. You ready? Why is smooth peanut butter okay, but crunchy peanut butter not? Because in smooth peanut butter, all the peanuts have been transformed into something else. But in crunchy peanut butter, you still have peanuts in their original form, and that could be mistaken for grains, and therefore you can't have that. So smooth peanut butter is okay, but crunchy peanut butter is not. And you think Judaism isn't wise. Corn oil. Corn is a grain. So corn oil you can't have. Soybean oil you could have. Canola oil you could have. Safflower oil you could have. Okay? Peanut oil you can because it's not in its natural form. But raw-shelled peanuts you can't. Okay? You can't have it in its natural form because it looks like a grain. And you could make the mistake and actually end up eating grain by mistake. Well, maybe yours don't. Corn oil is different. Corn's a grain. So corn oil is out. Corn syrup solids are out. Corn syrup is out. So diet Dr. Pepper is kosher for Pesach, but regular Dr. Pepper is not. Because regular Dr. Pepper is made with corn syrup, and diet Dr. Pepper is made with sucralose. Unless you get it from someplace where it has pure cane sugar. So what happens is they make a run of Coca-Cola this time of year with cane sugar instead of the corn syrup. People who are real affendicios of Coca-Cola, and there are people who are crazy Coca-Cola drinkers, wait till this time of year, non-Jews, and they buy up all the Pesach Coke because they like the sugar taste instead of the corn syrup taste. They can actually taste the difference. I know people who they love this time, they love kosher Pesach Coca-Cola. I think there are other things to love in life more, but if you want to know the truth. I mean, I love good books. I love my children, my wife. Yes, please, Sally. It has vinegar in it. You take mustard seeds and you dissolve them in vinegar, and that's how you make yellow mustard. You can get kosher for Pesach mustard if what? Yes, you can get kosher Pesach mustard if the vinegar that's used in the making of it is wine vinegar or apple cider vinegar, not grain vinegar. Most vinegar is grain that has been fermented. That's what vinegar is. Okay? As long as you ask me the question, let me go a couple of other products just like that one. Vanilla. Vanilla is a bean. So if you take it out of its natural state, you should be able to use vanilla. However, when you get vanilla extract, it is dissolved in alcohol. The alcohol could be grain alcohol, or it could be fruit alcohol. If it's grain alcohol, it's chumetz. If it's fruit alcohol, it's pesachdik. So you have to go get kosher Pesach vanilla. Yes, I know it costs 3 times as much. No, there's no reason why it should cost 3 times as much, except that the world is full of ganefs. What do you want out of my life, right? So these are prepared products like this. You always have, if you're interested in keeping the holiday carefully, you have to be very careful when you eat prepared products. So here is my first recommendation. You ready? To the extent possible, eat natural foods. All fruits and vegetables are kosher for Pesach. There's no such thing as a not kosher for Pesach orange. All fruits and vegetables, all meats that are kosher for Pesach. Don't bring me a ham and say I'm wrong, right? Fish is kosher Pesach, all kosher fishes, right? Dairy products that are pure are all kosher Pesach. Now, there's a problem with things like butter and milk because they add additives to them. They'll sometimes say vitamin D added. And the question is, well, what kind of vitamin D? What was it, is it dissolved in alcohol or a grain, some kind of grain solvent, you see? Same thing with butter. A lot of times butter comes out white, so they add a coloring to it to make it that nice luscious yellow, and you have to be careful that the coloring doesn't have something in it. But all natural products are Pesachdik, okay? So if you just eat natural foods, you're okay. If you start adding prepared foods, mustard, ketchup, potato chips, cake mixes, etc., then you get into the stuff about what's in it. I don't know how many of you read labels. My mother taught me to read food labels from the time I was a little kid. We were looking for kosher things, but over the years, the labels kept getting longer, you know? They're like 18, 19, 20 ingredients into something that should be very simple. And the reason is because food manufacturers now use all sorts of chemical flavorings and colorings and preservatives, and you just don't know what that stuff is. So the reason why some of us will look for a kosher sign on a product, and you look for the large P, right? Not the small p, that means parv. The large P is Passover, okay? Is because you don't know what else is, you want someone to go check and make sure that the stuff there is kosher, is kosher for Passover, if you're interested in this kind of stuff, okay? And you don't know what the stuff in it is, okay? Yes, Sandy. All right, we're going to come to that in a second. I just want to lay the basis of it, okay? Is this all clear so far? I still haven't answered the why question, which I will get to in a minute. Yes. We're about to get to that. Hang on. Kitniot means legumes. That's all. Yes, please. All fruits and vegetables. Yeah. Fruits and vegetables, not beans, because they're legumes. We'll come back to that in a second. But string beans is a big argument about. Just like there's an argument about swordfish. You know, but fruits and vegetables, meats and fish, dairy products, anything. What? We'll get to peas and beans in just a second. But I mean, make sure that this is all clear. Is this all clear so far? Right? Carrots, potatoes, broccoli, artichokes, cauliflower, bok choy, asparagus. There's plenty to eat, guys. Plenty to eat. Yes, please. Okay, that's a great question. First of all, to dray your cup, that's the reason why. That's your reason. Because the reason they thought it was necessary to get this complicated was because this, first of all, the story is such a powerful story. The preservation of the story in the symbols of the holiday was sacred to the people of Israel. The Torah says you're not supposed to own any chametz, see any chametz, or eat any chametz. Right? Bal yirev bal yimatze. It shouldn't be seen in your home. Right? And it shouldn't be around you. So the question is, you take all these prohibitions in order to make sure that none of the prohibitions are violated. Okay? And this is what you do. Now, each one of us has to decide how much of this you want to sort of bring into your life and how complicated you want to make this. Right? Nina and I, we were both liberal American rabbis, right? So we keep a kosher home, 2 sets of everything. Actually, more than 2, but we have sets of everything. And on Pesach, we do a thorough spring cleaning of the kitchen. And by the way, last night, as my back is killing me because I'm finishing the second refrigerator, it occurs to me that even on its own, by the way, this is not a bad thing to do. Once a year, take out everything from the fridge, pull out all the shelves, wipe it down with Lysol. Because I found all sorts of things that had been there for I found Jimmy Hoffa. I mean, you know, I don't know what he was doing in there. I found the 18 minutes of the Nixon tapes. Stormy Daniels is living in the back of my fridge. I mean, it's getting a little stale, but, you know, I mean, so doing this kind of cleaning is not a bad thing to do, number one. The dishwasher. So here you're going to get, I'm going to tell you now that I'm the liberal side of these things. There are rabbis much more conservative, small c and big C, than me. If you ask Orthodox rabbis, they'll tell you all kinds of, I'm going to tell you what I do, okay? Chametz is not mystical, it's physical. Because it's not mystical, it's physical, a thorough cleaning of anything that's not porous makes it kosher for Pesach, okay? We have stainless steel flatware. We actually have 2 place settings in sterling, but I've never eaten off of them. They were given to us as wedding gifts. Nina registered, and 2 friends of her mother gave us 2 settings of stainless steel. But we're married now 39 years, and I've never eaten off of these. So if you see my wife, ask her what they look like, because I've never seen them. I'm told that I own these things, right? So we have stainless steel, right? Stainless steel is not porous. It's cleanable. So what we do is we use our regular silverware for Pesach. We just wash it, you know. The dishwasher. The dishwasher, first of all, when I worked at Camp Ramah in California, I was the director of Camp Ramah for 4 years, and every year, twice a year, we welcomed the Ventura County Health Department. And that guy taught me a lot about cleaning stuff. He said, here's what you do. He said, once a year, take a cup of chlorine bleach, pour it into your dishwasher, and run it at its most hot cycle. And that will clean your dishwasher. Anything that survives that isn't food anymore. So that's my way of koshering the dishwasher, right? First, I clean out the filters and stuff. You know, down the bottom, it has the thing, all that schmutz. So I'll clean out all those filters and things. And then I pour a cup of chlorine bleach. And I happen to do, we also use our regular glassware, because glassware is also not porous. So I put all the glasses into the dishwasher, and I put in a cup of chlorine bleach, and they come out sparkling clean. Get out of the kitchen while you're doing this, by the way, because it'll fill up with chlorine gas. It feels like the First World War in my kitchen. It'll burn your eyes. And so open up all the windows. And that's how I kosher the dishwasher. So we use all of our glassware. Now, Pyrex is a big argument. Some of the Orthodox rabbis says you can't use your Pyrex because it's porous. I think that's nonsense. But so we went out and bought fancy Pyrex for Pesach. But we use all of our glasses, all of our flatware. Anything that's metal we use. The peelers and stuff, you know, all of the kitchen stuff, you know. Pots and pans. Now, my Chabad cousin uses his regular pots and pans, but he covers the handles with tin foil. And I said, the handles don't come into contact with the food. He says, yeah, but my mother covered the handles with tin foil. So I said, okay, Moses covered the handles. You can use your pots and pans, right? Yeah, as long as you wash them out really carefully. And if anything looks like it's discolored, I mean, remember that the people who created these rules didn't have 180-degree dishwashers and very strong soap. So just, you know, don't go crazy. It's physical. Clean it out, and then it's clean, and then it's done. And for the rest of the day, I'm going to clean the oven this week. This is a task because I got to clean all the racks. And then God gave us a wonderful gift. God gave us a Thermador self-cleaning oven. You push a bunch of things. Do it in the middle of the night, though, because if you're in the house while it's happening, it's disgusting. Yeah, you put the exhauster, just open up all the windows. I do it at 2 o'clock in the morning, right? It runs for whatever, 3, 4, 5 hours at 9 million degrees, and in the morning, everything's all nice. I wish the whole kitchen had a self-cleaning. I wish my children had a self-cleaning thing. But that's what we do. Does that make some sense? Yeah, please. Nancy. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, then it's fine. Yeah. I can even give you... absolutely. Yeah, anything that's brand new is brand new. Here's even better. There is a rule in the Talmud because they worried about us. If you have something that's porous and you set it aside for 1 calendar year, it goes back to being brand new. So if you happen to have, say, a ceramic thing that you want to use for Pesach, right? Set it aside for a year. By the next year, it's now back to zero again. The idea being that anything that might have gotten caught in the pores of that thing will have dried out and desiccated by the end of a calendar year, and if you wash it thoroughly, then it's now clean again. So that's another way to do it. Because the rabbis were also, believe it or not, had a little bit of worry about, you know, it's expensive to do all this, and nuts, you know. So let's at least have a couple of things that are more reasonable. So this is some of the reasonability. I'm going to get to the conservative movement in just a second. Judy. Yeah. I don't know. I don't know what's in it. I use chlorine bleach. It's disgusting, but it sure works. And cheap. You know, yeah, you just pour it in before you start the dishwasher. Instead of putting soap in it, pour 1 cup of chlorine bleach. This is what the guy from the health department taught me. Just dump it in. Just dump it in. It's gonna wash through the cycle. It's gonna wash through the cycle. The chlorine bleach, because the cycle is so thorough, it's going to find every corner of the inside of your dishwasher, and it's going to sanitize And by the way, for the next month or the next year, your dishwasher is going to smell nice. Because my dishwasher starts to smell a little funky after a while. So doing this every now and again actually does a nice job. You have to clean out the filters first. You have to get down and take all that junk out and rinse it off. There's all kinds of goo down there. You know, creature of the Black Lagoon lives in the back of my dishwasher. All right, here's the other thing. So I told you all this stuff so far, right? Everybody got it? I still haven't answered the why question, so don't leave until I do. But let me get to the conservative movement's new tshuva. Yes, please. Yeah. We have a big Seder every year because my wife's family comes by. So we went out to Target and bought glass dishes. So we have really nice china for milchik and really have plain glass for fleischiks. And if it's Corella and it's glass, then use it. Okay, anybody? These are good questions. So, yes, please. Yeah, yeah. No, we clean up the whole house. Yeah, we try to go through the whole house. We take the cushions off the couch and vacuum under there because we eat popcorn on the couch. You find, all your Super Bowl pennants and things down there. We go through the bedrooms and try to make sure that all the... I even have a custom of getting my car washed. On Friday morning after the Siyum, we'll have a service for firstborn, so I always take my son and then we go get the car wash and go get breakfast. I don't know, there's something about getting the car washed that makes it Pesach. I don't know why. Yeah, we clean out the whole house. Okay? Now, the conservative movement and the why, okay? The conservative movement, the geniuses of the conservative movement are interested in balancing the strictness of Jewish law with a sort of reasonability factor, okay? But they always do it with a sense of history. So it turns out that over the course of history, that ruling about legumes was disputed. It wasn't universal. In fact, it wasn't even the majority opinion in certain communities. So because it was always a disputed thing, because there were certain communities where beans, for example, had to be eaten, the conservative movement came out last year and said, don't bother. You can eat legumes. So kitniot, which is the name for legumes, okay, are now, in the conservative halacha, now acceptable. Okay? Now, having said that, you ask me the question, so Rabbi, do you eat kitniot? The answer is no. And the question is why? And the answer is because my mother didn't, And I observe, and I know all the books of the Talmud, and I read the bulletins from my rabbis' union, but when it comes to a contest between a bunch of rabbis who think they know everything and my mother wins. Right. The other reason why is, look, there are a lot of things we can do to make this holiday easier, and I want to make it reasonable for people. But I also think that the radical change in our diet that the holiday asks us for 1 week is kind of wonderful, right? It's kind of, first of all, it doesn't restrict, I don't know about you, but I put on weight on Pesach. I mean, you don't starve on Pesach, but you become ingenious about new things. I make a lasagna, I make a matzah lasagna to die for, right? Anybody want to come over for dinner? I will make you a matzah lasagna dinner like your mama used to make, You become, matzah pizza, matzah with peanut butter, matzah toffees. There's a million different things that you can do, and I don't know why I have to change. I don't. I do it the way my mother did it, which is my tradition. And so I don't advertise this to anybody. I don't make anybody feel badly about what they do and don't do. I just think that it's really nice for 1 week of the year that my kids and my family and my guests and my friends who come into my house know that this is a very special. Now remember, I grew up, my father's a baker, my mother's a bakery lady. Pesach for our house we lived in the Chumetz palace of the world, right? Pesach in our house was a big deal. Because first of all, it was the only week of the year my dad was home. For a whole week he was home. We used to go to Disneyland every year with a backpack full of food, right? Meet all the other Frum family. It was great. But the idea was it became something very special for us as kids, right? And I think creating, and it became fun because you had to figure out, sort of, hacks. How do you get around this thing, and how do you find a way to do it? So that's my recommendation. If this is your custom, then keep the custom, okay? All right, but I don't judge people. I want everybody to enjoy the thrill of being Jewish. And this week is just one of the most thrilling things. So let's go back just one more second. So why all of this? Why leaven of all things? Well, there's an anthropology to this that's very, very interesting, because it turns out that that the people who invented yeast were the Egyptians. They were the ones that were in world history, they were the first to invent yeast. They also were the first to invent beer, by the way, because if you invent yeast, you invent beer. And sourdough bread, and all that. So the leaven is associated with many different things in anthropology. One of the things is with Egypt. So the idea of cleaning the leaven out of my home is the idea of cleaning the Egypt out of my home, cleaning the whole legacy of slavery and persecution out of the house. And then the idea at the same time is to clean it out from yourself. The Hebrew word chametz, which we use to mean everything you're not allowed to eat Pesach, is the same word for chamutz. It means sour. So the idea is that this is 6 months away from Yom Kippur. Pesach and Yom Kippur are opposite ends of the calendar, right? Right? So on Yom Kippur, you sit and you clean all the sin out of your life. Now I want you to clean everything that's sour and crummy out of your life. And you think about the resentments and the grudges and the insults and all of the kind of personal chumetz that finds its way into your soul. As you're cleaning the house for Pesach, for the way we eat, you're supposed to clean the soul of all of this stuff that's become rotten and moldy and old and crummy and sour in the human spirit. And begin the springtime with a sense of freshness and liberation. Right? Begin the springtime with something brand new. So these are some of the symbolic meanings of it. The practical meaning of it is that for 1 week of the year, it's just fun to be, to eat, because it's all different. No meal is the same. One of the reasons I shouldn't say resent, that's too strong a word. One of the reasons I reject, too still strong a word. One of the reasons I'm not so sure about all of those Manischewitz products at Ralph's is that what they're trying to do is recreate my regular diet in a kosher for Pesach manner. And that's exactly the opposite of what the holiday is supposed to be, right? So you can get kosher for Pesach Cheerios. No. For 1 week of the year, I eat matzah and peanut butter for breakfast, right? It's the only week, or matzah bread, right? You can get kosher for Passover pancake mix. Come on. Kosher for Pesach fettuccine Alfredo. Again, I think it's the exact opposite. I think the idea is to change everything for a week. Why? Because 1 week of the year, at the beginning of springtime, we celebrate freedom. And we celebrate the capacity to remember what we were and to celebrate where we've become. And I think it's a much nicer way to do it. So I really recommend, don't go buy all that. I mean, it's cute. It's, Haroset flavored ice cream, No, it exists. But I think it's more interesting to try to figure out other kinds of ways of doing it. I really think making the week interesting and special. And this idea of trying to clean the Egypt out of us. Egypt, in Hebrew, the name of Egypt is Mitzrayim. I think I talked about this on the video this morning. The word tsar is at its heart, is its root. Tsar means narrow. Egypt is the narrow place. Every one of us has a narrow place, right? Every one of us has a thing that sets us off. Every one of us has our intolerances. Every one of us has our grudges. Every one of us has our resentments. This time of year, let it go. Just let it go. You call somebody up, tell them, all right, we're done. No more yelling. We try to find a certain openness of heart and become liberated from that. Because the deepest slavery is the slavery of your own emotions. It's the slavery of our own resentments. It's the slavery of our own angers, right? I told you a story many, many times about my grandmother. So my mother, this is my grandmother on my father's side there were 5 sisters. 5 sisters, 2 brothers. 2 brothers became great rabbis. The 5 sisters hated each other, sort of. right? So my mother, the other side of the family, had a wicked sense of humor. She would invite all of them to the Seder table and seat them together. So they'd all sit down at the end of the table. I told you this story, right? And borching. You know what borching means? It was like they wouldn't be, they had enough respect for our house not to actually get into an actual argument, but they would like glare at each other. And they would exchange individual words in various languages that I don't speak. And when I was a little kid, so at one point I went up to my bubby and I said, my bubby's a loving lady. I said, Bubby, why are you so mad at Aunt Rosie? Right? And she looked at me, she said, never mention that woman's name in my presence again. But Bubby, why are you so mad at her? Don't ask. Which I interpreted to mean, I forgot. Like 30 years ago, like money was lent and not paid back, or something was broken, or somebody showed up or didn't show up to something, and they just decided they hated each other, you know? So Bubby and Aunt Rosie and Aunt Sarah and Aunt Sonia and Aunt Bessie, like, they just, this, you know, don't ever say, you say, Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah came to America in God knows, 1908 or something, 1914, and lived in America basically her whole life. She came as a child, but never learned English very well. She spoke with a Yiddish accent, you know, from the Yiddish, and she would always go to rummage sales and find shirts, and Edel, I found you a shirt. Bubby, and Sarah, it's 8 sizes too small, but it looks good on you, you know. And then and Sarah, she buried 3 husbands, and when she buried the 3rd, she realized enough was enough. So she gave her life to volunteering. So he'd say, and Sarah, where have you been today? She said, I went to the Braille. I said, what did you do to the Braille? I read to the Braille. You read to the Braille, you know? What did you read to the Braille? Charles Dickens. So this poor guy thinks Charles Dickens has this thick Yiddish accent, you know. It was the worst, the best of the times and the worst of the times. Right? I mean, I just had this image, this poor blind guy going out of his mind. Then she would go visit old age homes. She said, I went with a man in the old age home. You went with the man in the old age home? How old was he? 77. I said, Sarah, you're 88. You took 2 buses to get, yes, he's a very old man, you know. This is Aunt Sarah. I mean, this tiny, round lady. She was a union organizer on the Lower East Side of Manhattan in the 30s. I mean, she fought the Pinkertons. I mean, you know, she was always angry. She couldn't stand each other. These ladies are angry at each other. And then Aunt Rosie died, which wasn't a surprise because she personally kept the Chesterfield Cigarette Company in business, right? In fact, you can go to Mount Sinai Memorial Park, and if you stand on her grave, it still smells like cigarettes. Somehow it's come up from below. It's amazing. And by the way, you could go to Mount Sinai, and they're all buried next to each other. You put your ear to the ground, they're still screaming at each other. And Rosie died, and we all went to the funeral, and my bubby just lost it. And I was a kid. I went over and I held her, and I said, Bubby, you okay? And she said, yeah. I said, Bubby, can I ask you something? You hated Aunt Rosie. You hated her. Why are you crying? And she said, that's why I'm crying. Said, all the years we should have been sisters. All the years wasted in anger. And what happened is, one by one, every year, another one of them died. And each one of them, the grief was worse because they realized, right? That's chumetz. That's the chumetz. That's the chumetz of life, you see? Right? So you got to, let go. That's what the chumetz. So you're going to clean the fridge and clean the stove and clean the oven and clean under the couch cushions and clean the car. You got to clean out the schmutz. That's really, you got to clean out all the sourness. Otherwise, we become slaves to our resentments, and that's a terrible way to be. Any last questions? I think I've answered every question, and if I haven't, I will try to obscure the next one. Yes? All fruit. All fruit. And fruit's good for you, too. Yeah, dried fruit's fine. As long as it's pure dried fruit. I mean, if they start adding coverings and stuff. You know, these peanuts that have that stuff on it. Don't do that. And all tree nuts are okay. Peanuts are not nuts, by the way. Peanuts are legumes. But tree nuts, walnuts, cashews, almonds, all fine. Right? Sesame seeds, there's a big argument about because they look like grains. So sesame oil's okay, but sesame seeds, probably not. Capers are okay as long as they're not dissolved in vinegar. The caper itself is a flower, but it's dissolved in vinegar. So if you have to make sure that the vinegar that it comes in is either just brine, it's not vinegar, or if it is in vinegar, that it's a fruit vinegar, a wine vinegar, not a. So capers, you got to be careful of. I put my capers away for Pesach because I don't know what they're in. When I went through the fridge last night, and any foods that I just don't know what all this stuff is, I put that away just for Pesach. And I just try to eat like straight foods, natural foods. Carol. It's much. What is what? No, you can't because it has still, I mean, the conservative movement would say yes. The Orthodox would say, yeah, the new rules would say they would be okay. Smooth is okay. And what I do is you can go and spend your money on kosher for Passover peanut butter, but there's two reasons not to do that. One, it's too expensive, and two, it's the bad stuff that's mixed with the hydrolyzed oil. Go to Trader Joe's and get a jar of their pure peanut butter. It has the oil on the top. You got to mix it. But if you want something even better, Carol, get the almond butter. The almond butter it's expensive. It's like $7 a jar, and it's fattening as hell, but it's just amazing. It's just amazing. Yeah, I eat it out of the jar and a spoon, but it's just amazing. Well, I wish all of you a happy, healthy, and sweet Pesach. I hope it's a wonderful holiday for everyone. And if anybody has any other questions or concerns, please let me know. String beans. Here's the problem with string beans. There's a big argument about string beans because the bean itself is kitniot. So according to the new conservative movement, you can have string beans. But the bean is the kitniot. But if it's in the string, then it should be okay. Do something. Do asparagus. Now come on. Asparagus is much better. Broccoli, much better. Cauliflower. Do a cauliflower roast. Cover the cauliflower with olive oil and a little bit of garlic salt and put it in the broiler and give it a char. It's out of this world. You can get the riced cauliflower, which tastes like mashed potatoes only. It's great. You can do that. Go to Valley Produce. Just be careful. You get elbowed by a little lady. And there's all this wonderful stuff out there. Bok choy, which doesn't sound Jewish, but it's amazing. It's a wonderful vegetable, right? Rice in the conservative movement? That's what a great name for a book. You know. According to the conservative movement, rice you should not be able to eat unless you're Sephardic or you're married to somebody Sephardic. They don't eat. They eat couscous. Well, they would eat couscous. That's why they don't eat rice. Quinoa, yes. Get quinoa. Quinoa. Quinoa's a flour. Yes, so you can't have it. Because it says Israeli on it, so they figured it's for Pesach. Right? I like the one about your Passover ham. That's the one I like the best. You know, is this ham kosher? A Passover chali, yeah, olivai. Peas are the legumes. So peas should not be allowed for Pesach according to the old tradition. The conservative movement would say you can have peas. I would personally say, again, go with the asparagus, the cauliflower, the broccoli, the carrots, the bok choy. There's 100 vegetables. Pick something else. Yeah. What? I've never heard that. Vegetables that require irrigation. I got news for you. You're in California. Everything requires irrigation. People require irrigation. Have a happy, healthy Pesach. Take good care.